eating a dinner, Paul?
No.
We're so laid back. We're so pro.
I don't know what time it is in Namibia, but it's 7 o'clock here.
It's 9 o'clock.
Right, guys, we are live. So let's make a start on this one. So good evening, everyone. Good evening, YouTubers. Good evening, everyone. Simon Hodgson's going to be talking as usual in a second, and we need to mute him instantly. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another lockdown session, which I'm sure we'll be talking about later on. So good evening. Thank you ever so much for joining us this evening. As usual, this session, this panel meeting is here to answer, in fact, your questions. So if you do have any questions, make sure that you type them in to the chat box and we will do our level best to answer them. In the meantime, let's do introductions. And Bronwin, where are you today?
Hi, everybody. I'm in Africa. I'm in Namibia. I'm lucky enough to be in a great Wi-Fi area, and I've wired up. But yes, I like to do some adventures, and I'm doing some wildlife conservation work as a volunteer out here in Namibia with my husband. All thanks to property investing, and that's why this panel is fantastic, because it's full of the experts that I use and have been using for a number of years. And these live events are fantastic. We're getting such a great response. I think we had 160 people register, and I had another 30 today register. So I know we're going to have lots and lots of people listening in, and lots of questions already have been asked in advance. So yes, I'm Bronwin Burncombe. I'm a property investor and adventurer, and I love to help people learn. So I have an online program of learning called Property Investing Foundation. And if anyone's interested, I've also written a book called Building Your Dream Life. So connect with me. All our links are in the details on YouTube. So yeah, let's move on. Who else wants to introduce themselves? Teresa.
Yes, I'll come on next. My name is Teresa. I'm here representing the National Residential Landlord Association. So I have been working for them for about over 5 years now, but I am a HMO landlord myself. Basically, if you are an investor out there and you are planning on purchasing a property to rent out, I can't recommend enough that you do, visit our website, because, we do have everything you need to start a tenancy, manage a tenancy, and to end a tenancy if you need to. But even if you just want to upskill on, what it is to be a landlord, then we do training courses as well, because it may be that you just want to, employ an agent to take care of all those details for you. But I would still recommend that taking a course, just so that you know what is expected of you as a landlord, so that you can ask your agent the right questions and make sure they're doing a good job for you. But anyway, Simon's put my details at the bottom of the video with a discount code should you want to access that. And I will pass over now to Tim.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to say I'm a lion tamer and I'm calling from my Bahamas office, but if I did say that, I'd be fibbing. Sadly, Bronwin is actually somewhere exciting. I'm not. I'm stuck in Salisbury, which is not quite as exotic, I don't think, and there are a few less elephants around. Anyway, as you may have gathered, I'm Tim Bishop. I'm a solicitor. I own a law firm called Banalak & Bishop. We've got about 65 staff. We have about 22 in the property team. We specialise in particularly acting for property investors nationwide. We have a very specialist lease extension team. Sadly, we're getting a lot of litigation at the moment. I'm fear that in the next couple of years, that's only going to increase as some property investors get into difficulties. I'm also, however, an investor and developer. So I've done a commercial conversion. I hold 6 flats, 4 as serviced accommodation and a couple of ASTs. And I've converted an HMO from a 3-bed to an 8-bed, which is going very well. And I'm looking to double my portfolio next year when and if the market changes. Tim Bishop, Banalak & Bishop, solicitors who understand property investors.
Let's move on to Simon Hodgson.
Right, okay. Simon, I'll try and stick within my normal time frame of about 30 seconds, as I do always. Right, so I'm a mortgage broker. That's kind of why I'm here tonight. I've been a property investor for 20 years. I started back in the early noughties. getting a bit of education from an American guy called Russ Whitney, who, if any of you have heard of Simon Zucci first reached out and got a little bit of information from him. He wasn't great, this guy, to be fair, but at least it was a start. And what I really found was back then, if you had a little bit of knowledge, most brokers then didn't really understand what it was you were trying to do, how to do it, and which were the right lenders to work with. So I would give the then broker that I'd gone to, which was a residential broker, knew nothing about buy-to-lets, educated him on buy-to-lets. I then gave him my advice. He then charged me for my advice, mortgage, got paid a second time off my advice. Yeah. And as you can see, it was never going to work like that. So mortgages is kind of what I do. Obviously, I invest in property as well. Over the time, I've done title splits, flat conversions, blocks of flats, etc. And I think we're going to get a few questions tonight on lending. Yes, the news over the weekend has made today a bit of an interesting, if not hard to cope with day. Over to you, Paul, I think.
Thanks, Simon. Good evening, everyone. Yes, like everyone else on here, I'm a property investor, have been for 28 years. And one of the things I found when I was investing and starting to do the buy, refurb, refinance was I couldn't get great deals on the products. So I came across a guy called Nick Watchorn, and he convinced me to join LMPG. I managed to save nearly 50% on my first magnet kitchen compared to Howden's. And that's what got me involved with them. And since then, we've grown the business from 57 members to now approaching 5,000 members. So if you're a landlord and you're not, and you buy your own products or you're doing refurbs, then please come and talk to us. We do everything from boilers to bathrooms to kitchens to plasterboard to doors, windows, paint, insurance, etc., etc., etc. Everything you need for a refurb. So that's all about LMPG. I'm also on here. I'm happy to discuss anything within my portfolio, which I've got a bit of everything. I've got family lets, service accommodation, HMOs, student HMOs, homeless HMOs, which is a bit of a quandary, but I suppose it's social housing HMOs. And I've spent the weekend looking at co-living, which is the new thing for HMOs. So anyone got any questions on that, speak to Simon Mizovic. But that's me. Over to Simon.
So my name is Simon Mizovic from Optimised Accountants. I am your property tax specialist. The reason I'm laughing is because someone just asked the question. This is a question straight away to you, Paul. And I have to answer it. The question is, and I sincerely mean this, it's not from me. It says, good evening, all. What happened at the weekend, Simon? What happened to the Villa Paul? Well, I can tell you now, Liverpool are the top of the league. So all is good from my side. 7-2 quickly forgotten, with no defender, no goalkeeper, still the best in the world. So we'll leave Aston Villa well alone.
All I'll say is class is permanent, isn't it? I'm surprised you didn't say that, Simon.
Well, you don't need to when you're top of the tree. You don't need to. You don't talk downwards. That's what I never say. Because, So the first question. So if you're listening in and you haven't been able to ask your question through the registration page, or you're just coming straight on to the live session, then don't forget to type in your question now. We will answer those questions. We are live. So that's the beauty of this particular session. If there's a question that pops into your mind later on, ask away and we'll get onto the question. So you'll see me looking down at my phone. That's not just being unprofessional. That's normally a Wednesday, Tuesday session. But my reasoning for looking down at the phones is to look at the questions that's been asked before. So the question I have, so this is from Michelle. He says, my first question is it possible to be a partner of an LLP? And for anyone listening in, an LLP is a limited liability partnership, which is a limited company in itself. And what the question is I want to be an LLP member, but I don't want to be associated with them from a finance perspective. Now, you're always going to get this kind of thing coming up. Especially if you're worried about credit scores. And this is really a good thing about joint venture partners. But Simon, you must obviously do credit check, well, not you personally, but banks will do credit checks on particular people. If there's a LLP involved and there's partners, are they financially connected at that point in time?
That is a great question.
Be a good answer then, won't it?
It would be an absolutely fabulous answer. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, technically, yes, is the short answer. It's unlikely that, sorry, someone's just entered the door there. It's unlikely then that the credit reference agencies will link the two of you. However, it can happen. Within a limited company, the way around that would be, so this is not in a limited liability partnership, within a limited company, you would reduce your share holdings to less than 25% and you wouldn't be a director. So you could then take part in the limited company and the distributions of its profits, but you wouldn't necessarily be underwritten in terms of the mortgage, so therefore shouldn't, and I say shouldn't in inverted commas, because the information is available off public records, so the association can be made by anybody, should they want to, be associated. In a limited liability partnership, it's a little different because, okay, Simon, you can confirm this in terms of how the limited liability partnership is split up, can be determined by the people within it. Am I right in thinking?
Yeah.
Exactly the same as a limited liability company, but it's just not the actual formation of a company itself. So reducing the shareholding can be used to do that, to make yourself a minority person within that. However, it's even less likely to be successful than the limited company route. Trust is a big thing within a partnership or in any kind of venture. If you're at all worried about the people that you're going into business with, which that sounds like that question might be, yeah, then potentially you might look to structure something differently.
I think it's to do with the bank account particularly, because I know Michelle and we had this conversation.
Sorry.
So I think it's to do with the bank account. If they've got a joint bank account and he's in the bank account, is that going to cause a problem because his credit score is an issue?
The short answer is, if they could privately share a copy of the credit file of the person involved, I could discuss what might or might not be a good or not a good option. If it's just a low credit score with no missed payments, no defaults, nothing like that, nothing untoward, then a low credit score isn't necessarily the end of the world. Because I can pick, a broker can pick lenders that work off both credit checks and credit scores, and you can kind of go one way or the other to make it fit the client if the client's profile dictates that.
Okay, I'll introduce you. I think that's probably the easiest way, and see, what the detail is. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Over to Tim, really, similar kind of question. If you've got people that want to work together, one of the things I always say is that people might get together because they've met each other at a social event or a business networking event, and then they kind of jump into, I'm going to watch my phrase there actually, but they might jump into a association, let's call it that. The other thing might happen later on, but we'll stick to the professionalism. What, from a legal perspective, should they be sitting down with a lawyer or solicitor to say, okay, let's understand what your relationship is, what your legal responsibilities to one another should be? Should people do that as a standard, really?
Absolutely, and that's absolutely essential. There are four opportunities, I guess, if you set up in business. Either you do it on your own, nobody else, and that's fairly straightforward. Or alternatively, you get on board with someone else. And if you do so, you have three options. You have a limited company, which obviously you have to form, you're aware that you are forming a company, or a limited liability partnership, a similar format. But the danger with partnerships is that partnerships are automatically created when any two people go into business together. So once you've gone into business together, even if there's no partnership agreement, there's nothing in writing, you have a partnership. And what's more, the terms of that partnership are dictated by the 1890 Partnership Act. So in effect, your business is being, in terms of how you run it, the rules on how you run it are being decided by a whole load of old blokes who died probably 130 years ago. So it's not good news. And in some circumstances, it can be quite catastrophic. For example, if there are two people involved, one thing there isn't any immediate conclusion of is deadlock. What happens if there's a deadlock? If you want to do something, the other bloke wants to do the other thing, and you're 50-50, you're absolutely stuck. So there are all sorts of issues about whose responsibility for signing things, what people's roles are. So I think it's absolutely essential that anybody who goes into business decides what they're going to do and makes it quite clear, thinks it out, goes online, researches it, looks at the kind of questions they should ask, and then get a solicitor to draft a partnership agreement. A partnership agreement is not something you can just get online. Oh yeah, it'll just be a standard one. It's got to fit your circumstances. Now, there's certainly a page on our website I'm happy to share, which actually has got a whole checklist of the kind of things you need to think about, but it's absolutely essential. Yes, you need to talk about it, you need to confirm it, and you need to clarify it, because otherwise you may find you're going in a completely different direction. And we find that's often when problems emerge, when actually there's no clear written record of what people wanted to do when they went into business together. So absolutely a simple answer from me for once, yes.
Very good. Thank you ever so much for that. Moving on to a different type of question. In fact, Bronwin, do you have any other comments on that point in terms of partners getting together? And again, phraseology here. It's just professionalism. Let's keep it that way. How people should work each other out, and then say who's good at what and weaknesses.
Yeah.
What's your advice of people working together?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference here. If you're doing, say, a joint venture, or if you're setting up a company together and you're going into business together, that's massive. It's probably more commitment than getting married, I would say, because of involves money. But I often talk to people about doing joint ventures. I've done quite a lot of joint ventures with people, but a joint venture means that you share risk and you share the reward. It's the risky bit that you've got to be very careful about. And if you're going into a joint venture with somebody, you've really got to know them well. I know Simon Zucci, who taught me, he used to say that if you're going to do a JV with someone, you've got to be prepared to have them round for dinner and stay the night. Now, let's not get into Simon. Simon's not listening now. I don't know what he's doing, but you've got to get to know them well enough so that you know that you're going to work together well and you've got similar values. So you've also got to bring different things to the party. So there's no point in saying, I've got all the knowledge about property. If someone else has got money, great, we can work together. But I do JVs with a builder who does the building of my developments, which is brilliant because he's got knowledge I haven't got. I find the site, I might finance the site, and we work together. But we put together heads of terms, proper documents so that we understand and we get a chance to comment on them.
Can I come back on a couple of points there? And first of all, Simon, can I congratulate you for finding that wasp? Clearly it was annoying you. I'm glad to see you've gone and swatted it. So well done. I'm glad you got your priorities right. No, the thing I was going to mention were two things. I think Bronwin's exactly right about finding the right people. And I don't have it in front of me, but there's quite a good book. It rambles on a bit, but it's a good website as well called The Trust Equation about why people get together. And I found that quite useful, just 4 things to look at to see if you test the other person. So that's quite useful. But the fundamental thing is, and this is something which I think far, far too people take on board seriously, is due diligence. If you're getting into bed with someone, there are enormous financial consequences. And it's amazing how little people sometimes check the others out. So you really do need to check out. Just because they say something doesn't mean it's true. You find some terrible things. People have claimed to own property, to have qualifications, and normally it's true, but actually sometimes it's a complete and utter lie. So you do need to do due diligence. And that means really going into their details quite in a background. So if they say they own a property, make sure you know, not just that you've seen the property or they've shown you around it, but actually, if you want to be sure, you could even get check on the land registry. Do they own it? Is there another mortgage against it? All sorts of things. Due diligence is very important. I think sadly, most people involved in property are entrepreneurial, like me. They love the deal. They don't like the paperwork. I know it sounds odd, I'm a lawyer, but I now run the business. But I think far too people therefore cut these corners because it's a bit boring. But due diligence is absolutely essential. Don't do it, and it can be very, very expensive.
Okay, very good for that. And to be honest, Tim, when you talked about people should check each other out, absolutely people should. Again, using your phone with a swipe left, swipe right, I think it should be as good as that, to be fair. Talk about rambling on. Let's go back to Simon. The the question online through YouTube. So again, if you're listening into this and you are on YouTube, make sure you do ask your question. A couple of questions that's popped in just for you. The first one is, how quick can you get a buy-to-let mortgage if you've been refused by a major lender through another broker? So clearly some things do happen. Mortgage do say fall out of bed. Let's try and get off that subject. But what's your suggestions to people?
First of all, they need to get a copy of their credit file, whether that is either from Experian or Equifax. Equifax is probably the more the preferred one. That's the one that most lenders will work from. And then a broker or another broker needs to review the document, look at the information that's on there and see if we can work out what the problem is. The lender that is refused will most likely give it, or should give a reason as to why they don't want to lend if it's gone a certain way. If it's just a decision in principle that failed, usually that will come up and either say it's failed credit scoring, failed credit checking, or there are some missed payments that have not been declared. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that's what's happened here, but those are the most obvious and most common reasons. But there are other reasons that a lender can change their mind, especially in today's current climate. So if there was nothing untoward on the credit file and they still wanted to go for the same property, it wouldn't be out of the question to go for another lender and pick one who we think matches the credit profile that the client that they display effectively. Another one, really, I guess they need to reach out, if they don't mind, and share some information, and then I can give a bit more. Yeah, so Fayez, if you're listening into this, obviously, hopefully you are, but do give some more details and we'll come back to you. Another question to you, Simon. It's the Simon Show tonight. Phil's asked a question: having more than 10 properties is making it difficult to obtain best mortgage deals. Can you offer any advice? Okay, well, that would suggest then that the 10 mortgages are in their personal name. They breached then what most vanilla lenders that lend at the best rates in the market space would consider to be a small portfolio landlord. Typically, the rates will start from 2.99 once you've reached that milestone. I suggest strongly that they need to potentially have a conversation with a good tax advisor. Can't think of one right now. Yeah, to work out how to plan the rest of the growth of the portfolio, because either some of the properties that they've got at the moment could be transferred into limited company, especially with the stamp duty holiday, and or moving forward, buying additional properties. Consideration to LLP or limited company needs to be sort of taken on board. I suspect it's about remortgages that this particular person is talking about. They're looking to rebroker good deals, and they're now finding that they've got too many mortgages in their own name, and the good deals are reserved for those people who generally have less than 10 properties.
Good stuff. Let's change tact now, and let's talk about planning permission and permitted developments. I'm going to bring in, if it's okay, Tim and Paul, because we've not heard from Robin Hood Paul with his top on. In terms of the planning from office or a shop into residential use, that's the topic. Is permitted development still open? Is it different areas? And how hard is it to achieve? So let's start with you, Tim, if you don't mind.
Yes, I'm not a planning expert, but I believe it is open. I know partly because I did it myself. One thing to watch is the type of office. I had my application originally refused by the local council because they said it was the wrong type of office. Now, I know you could say it's the wrong type of leaves of the British Rail, but that they simply misunderstood the rules. There are two types of offices, and the one they're talking about you can't do are things like banks, where people come in and out all the time. But we managed to correct them and got some case law from our planner, very good planner, and so we got that through. So yes, they are still there. And as to whether or not they'll continue indefinitely, who knows? I think in terms of offices, I think a lot of the really easy stuff's gone. The low-hanging fruit, a lot of it's gone. Prices went up noticeably because after a while, I think canny office owners realised that they could actually ask a significant premium. And so I think while it can still be done, it's nowhere near as easy as it was 3 or 4 years ago. But yes, can still be done, but you need to do it properly. And obviously building regs and things do apply, and make sure you get a good planner. Otherwise, you could be knocked back like my idiot council did because they didn't understand their own rules.
Paul, any experience from your side? And we may go to Bronwin actually afterwards with the same kind of question. But Paul, what's your experience of this particular strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity, shops with uppers. But as Tim said, the secret is to get a good planning consultant on board, and that's what I would highly recommend. And it's definitely a strategy to adopt at the moment. Permitted development is available, but don't forget, if you're going to do any external adjustments, i.e. change the windows, change the fascia, change the wall, you do need planning permission. So that's why, as I said, to start with, see a good planning consultant. Just going back to your first question, was it Michelle or the lady? Honestly, as I'm totally, not connected with any of this, I'd say if you've got concerns already on your journey with this couple or other person, then I would say don't do it. You should, in my view, based as an accountant first, based on my training as a solicitor, based on my property experience, because I've done several JVs with people. Fortunately, the people I've done JVs with are all via a deed of trust. And whilst that's been specific to each one, as Tim suggested, make sure you do a deed of trust or a shareholders agreement if you're going into a limited company, a JVP. But financially, if you can, like I did, make sure the bank accounts are in your name. That way you can control everything, you can give access, but you'll never be tied financially to another person. And, things do change. There are a lot of people going through a lot of bad stuff at the moment. If you look on Facebook, I won't name names, but there are a lot of people losing a lot of money. And because they're losing money, they're having to, I won't say foreclose, but they're having to do a sale, urgent sale through auctions, and they're losing money. So if they lost money and then cause you to lose money, or vice versa, then please just be careful. As to repeat everyone else, do your due diligence. Over to you, Bronwin.
Okay, so going back to permitted developments, anything to do with planning is risky. Planners can be a complete nightmare and they vary as well. But permitted development was brought in to make it easier, supposedly, to get approval. You've still got to go through a process, but if it meets certain criteria, they have to give planning. So, you've got to have a certain amount of knowledge. You've got to get that education. I always come back to education. Get that knowledge enough to know, is this going to be a deal or not? If it's a listed building, you've got to go for full planning. Now, I know that because I did a course on how do I find and do due diligence on new sites like this. But I have done an office to residential PD and then sold it with the PD, didn't do the development. So you're adding the value. So if you can get really good at this, it's massive opportunity. But as Tim said, a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon. Doesn't mean to say you can't spot them, but you've got to have that knowledge to be able to assess the risk. That's my view.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. Good questions set tonight. And don't forget, if you are on YouTube, I will keep asking you to do this. Two things, in fact, I'm going to ask you to do now is give us a thumbs up. If you're enjoying this show and you like the anecdotes, steal from the rich, give to the poor, as Paul Hilliard would be doing in his top, then give us a thumbs up. I mean, it's just highly appreciated. Equally, if you do have any questions that you want to set Simon Hudson, which so you can talk about it for a couple of hours, then feel free to do that as well. Do make sure it's specific though. So Angelo's asked a question. We are thinking about selling our house. I'm going to go over to Bronwin and to Teresa about this, just to get your viewpoints. We are thinking about selling our house and renting for a while, then use the money to buy another house to live in, especially if the market drops. And that basically means, I guess, is let's take the opportunity to sell at a high price, keep the money in the bank account, and then buy when things are lower, and then use the rest of the money for buy-to-lets. Starting with you, Bronwin, then over to Teresa. Where do you think the market's going to be? I mean, there is this whole thing about people thinking it's COVID, there's the financial pressure. I mean, right now, Rishi Sunak seems to be printing money for the fun of it. So is there really a recession right now? Bronwin, what's your thoughts on what the property market might be?
Well, this is the golden question, isn't it? Everybody's been talking about this all along, and this is perfect timing, really, for us. In that, another lockdown means, is it going to get worse? Well, I think it was quite clear. Robert Jenrick was as a housing minister. Said actually renters and homeowners will be allowed to move. The property market is still open for business. I'm actually reading it here. Removal firms and estate agents can operate. Construction sites can and should continue. Tradespeople will be able to enter homes. So it's not as bad as it was, in my opinion, back in April. I'm selling houses at the moment. It's a slow process. But the people are out there, they want to buy. So I'm still pretty positive, but you do have to just check your particular location and make sure that you know what's happening. If some of the employers have gone bust, or if there's a problem locally with the economy, you've got to be aware of that. But there's still demand out there. Teresa, your views?
Yeah, can I just get a clarification on the question? Were they basically looking to move out of their home property and rent it out? Is that?
Yeah, so the gamble is to sell the home now, keep the money, and then next year, when there's a recession potentially, is to buy a new home for themselves, cheaper, discounted, and then use the rest of the money for buy-to-lets.
Right, so then they would just be going into another property and renting it out. So they will be signing up for, so they just have to take into account, what kind of tenancy agreement are they going to sign up for? Is it going to be a fixed term of 6 or 12 months? Because then otherwise, potentially they're going to be locked into a contract. So if they then want to, yes, I suppose that is just a consideration, just to see how long.
What do you think about the property markets, though, Teresa, from your side, and what the NRLA are suggesting that property prices might do in the future?
Yeah, we've not really sort of hooked into that side, because that is speculative. We do go out to our members to find out, how do our members feel about their business, what the plans are for the future, and we can see from recent member surveys that the confidence is going down. So there are more landlords looking to sell. So I suppose there are opportunities out there for investors, because the mood generally is quite low in the PR, in the private rental sector.
Okay.
I still think it's quite risky to assume that you're going to get some amazing deals. I think there will be opportunities, of course there will be, and things are changing, but to sell your house now because you think you're going to get a high price to then buy low again, I don't know, it feels a bit risky to me.
Yeah.
Can I come in just a couple of points there? In terms, certainly in terms of the market, normally of the stuff you get from the land registry is months out of date. So we regularly put online up-to-date figures, and we're not a massive firm, but we get through about 1,300 transactions in a normal year. So it's average about 100. In the last 2 months, we've done 170 and 180, but October was noticeably down, still way above average, but probably about 20% below where it was. And certainly when I've spoken to other estate agents, they think that's not entirely out of kilter. And these are our figures that were accurate as of last Friday at 5 o'clock. So I think number one, I think we've seen, anecdotally at least, probably it's hit its curve and it's starting to dip down. Of course, that was before lockdown. That's number one. Secondly, again, purely anecdotally, I've spoken to agents and they certainly feel, at least locally, and we're in Wiltshire and Hampshire, that prices are softer now. In particular, one thing I do, because we've got quite a big private client department, I'm executor on quite a few estates. So I have to decide prices houses are sold for. And I push and push and push normally to get it as high as they can. But I've had to now drop prices on a number of occasions in the last 2 or 3 weeks on the advice of really, really good agents, not the rubbish ones who you can never trust, but the really good ones who've been around for years, who I can always rely on. And so I've had to actually take a view, do I want to carry on trying to sell it at this particular price, or possibly next year when prices may or may not go down, and there'll be delays. So I've therefore accepted lower prices than I would normally be happy with. And thirdly, I think the other thing to bear in mind is delay. already there are quite a lot of delays in the conveyancing process. And I think these may well get worse. Just to give you an example, you've got number one, mortgages. I'm sure Simon can tell you all about the lenders. In general, my understanding is that lenders are going much slower than they would normally, partly because of capacity. So that's number one. Secondly, searches. I know many local government organisations and government organisations are going slow. Searches, certainly locally in Wiltshire, it was 6 weeks. I think it was less in Hampshire. That causes a delay. Then you talk about things like Help to Buy. I'm sure Bronwin knows more about this than I do, but they're really slow. All these organisations are going slowly. And last, on top of that, you've then got solicitors. And unfortunately, there are two types of solicitor, in my view, at the moment. Those who come out of coronavirus reasonably well, they've got technology, they've adapted, they've got systems. If necessary, have taken on more staff. I've taken on a locum solicitor and 2 paralegals on fixed term contracts to make sure I can keep the work up, but keep standards. But a lot of firms haven't. So no matter how good your solicitor is, you may have the best one in the world, us, of course. Or on the other hand, you might have somebody awful. And if you've got a chain and there's one dodgy one halfway down the chain, your chain can't go any quicker. Chains go at the speed of the slowest link. And unfortunately, at the moment, there are a hell of a lot of solicitors who are going very, very slowly. So beware if you are buying and selling, speed, it may be an issue. And certainly as we get nearer to March, unless the Chancellor decides to change his mind on stamp duty, bear in mind also that that's over the Easter weekend. The 31st of March is the Easter weekend, plus Help to Buy is supposed to run out at that time. There's a real danger that things will slow, and who knows. But for speed, there are issues at the moment, and I think anybody who's buying and selling needs to give that some thought.
Yeah, and just add to that, we've got the transactional costs of the conveyancing, the buy-to-let mortgages that you're going to go through. You've got the potential capital gains tax, especially if I appreciate if it's your own home, you don't pay capital gains tax. But if you are thinking, and I see this a lot, whereby people think about selling a buy-to-let property because they've got poor return on investment on their existing property, and therefore they want to buy properties maybe in the north, for instance, where you get better return investments. Then the issue is with that is, as Tim suggested, you've got a long delay. You've got the transactional cost to go with that, CGT, the stamp duty, land tax of buying the new property. And whenever I find people that say, okay, I'm not making a good return investment, I'm making 6-7% return investment, which actually isn't bad at all, but they want to get a HMO in a different location, which gets 15% return investment. When I finalize those numbers with them, often the case is they don't make that much money. And back to what Bronwin was saying is, you are taking a huge risk, because if property prices don't move and now you are moving to a home, you are potentially, you could be paying equal, if not more, but now you've got all the transactional costs to go with it. So my view on that will be, don't bet, don't go on to, roulette and play on red and black. It's a little bit too risky for my liking, so I wouldn't personally do it. One question, yeah, come on, Sam.
I just want to, if in case it doesn't come up later, can I just let you just make some comments about SDLT, stamp duty? This is the Law Society are looking at this quite seriously, and they sent out some stuff today, and they raised some interesting questions, because obviously at the moment it seems like a long time to go. It's the end of March. Now, normally with the average conveyance, it takes 3-4 months, you should be all right. But with the things I've explained, I think everyone was nodding, that the delays at the moment, suddenly there's going to be a stage where there's a realistic possibility of some of these transactions not going through. So they're starting to raise some questions that we need to go with our clients. And they said this only came through today. And they were talking about, well, okay, if SDLT, if you miss the SDLT deadline, do you still want to complete? Number one. What about the lenders? Will there be a condition saying, actually, you've only got so much money, if we aren't going to give you any more? So do you have the funds if you miss the SDLT deadline? Are you going to have a clause in the contract that if the SDLT deadline is changed, the price changes? Because if you haven't got the money to pay, you may expect contribution from the other side. So I think there are all sorts of issues raised by this. And it's not a normal recession where perhaps you can guarantee or you expect what's happening. We have no idea what's happening. Every day things change, but there are some real issues here with SDLT. And therefore, if people are worried about delay and are worried about stamp, they're going to have to start thinking about these things earlier, and it becomes much more complex. So just thought I'd share those weird and wonderful thoughts. We haven't really thought them through ourselves. It only came through today, but clearly there are some real issues for people to answer.
Just on that, Tim, I have heard from other advisors that they are looking to extend the stamp duty land tax holiday throughout next year. Have you heard anything along that line?
Nothing. I've heard lots of rumours. I've heard mutterings and suggestions, but it's only really mutterings and suggestions so far. It may well happen. There are so many opportunities. There are at least three options, I suppose. Number one, they extend it as it is for an extended period. That's quite possible. Just done it with furlough. Number two, they don't, and property falls off a cliff. Or the third possibility is they take the opportunity of actually a more substantial change in the way SDLT is charged, because I think people have felt for a while it's actually been discouraging home ownership and discouraging people moving in particular. And I know certainly when unemployment creeps up, one thing that I know governments are keen to do is encourage flexibility of jobs. And if it's really expensive just to buy another house because of stamp, that might be another reason for them to change. But we don't know. Anything could happen. Given the fact that they changed the rules on tenancy, as I'm sure Teresa knows, when it was going to be changed on Monday, and I think at 12 o'clock on Friday they changed the rules again. So 5 working hours. So the fact we've got 5 months to go, anything could happen.
Yeah, I agree. So I one other question just before we Simon, was you about to say something there?
I was going to add into that. I've had this conversation. Now, obviously, I'm not giving any direct advice, but it's just a group of us here.
Slope your shoulders. Sorry, you carry on.
Indeed. Oh, yeah. I would say that obviously selling your own house and trying to capitalise that is gambling. If you're that confident about your property journey, your property investing, if you've gone out and got a good education, and that's the first thing you should do, get educated, work out what is a good deal, what isn't a good deal, where to buy it, why you're buying it, what your strategy is. Yeah. If you get all of those kinds of things right, and clearly Bronwin here tonight can help anyone who hasn't got to that point, the right deals always find money to get funding. And you don't necessarily need to sell your house to be able to go and maximize your position. Your position can be leveraged and maximized by getting really knowledgeable about the market in your area and then going out and finding deals, whether that's now or whether that is when stamp duty does come back to normal, if it does, or whether there's a step change. And that way you've preserved the equity in your own home, yeah, which takes stress off you, which then means that you'll make better decisions when you're making investment decisions. Yeah. And you'll actually find, I suggest that you will actually make more money by not doing that. Counterintuitive, but the whole psychology and mindset change that goes with education and then going out and finding the right deal and letting money come to it then means that the second and third deal you go and do comes so much more quickly. Personally, that's what I would suggest. So I don't think that's even a question. Don't even consider selling your house. It's the wrong thing to do for completely different reasons about wherever the market's going or not, I'd say. And
that comment was sponsored by Headspace, the app that gives you tranquility. So in terms of the question around limited companies, it's not something I want to answer because it's too easy for me to kind of go into the detail about should you use a limited company or should you purchase properties in your own name. And this is really pertinent to high rate taxpayers. So I'm going to do what Simon's just done and just done a bit of slopey shoulders and ducked and dived. So I'm going to go over to Bronwin and over to Paul Hilliard. So starting with you, Bronwin, and then over to Paul, why have you used a limited company and what are the pros and cons of using a limited company as a property investor?
Okay, perfect. Well, initially I bought in my personal name, but as I got more education and as I saw that there was some changes in tax, I used my expert down there, Simon, and I said, what's the best way, given I want to be building a large portfolio over time, what's the best way for me personally to be buying in the future? Because we're all in different tax situations. I was working full time when I started. I was a high rate taxpayer, but when I gave up my job, I didn't want to be a high rate taxpayer. So you've got to think about your current situation and what your future situation is going to be and plan by taking advice and understanding what the pros and cons are. Obviously, there's section 24, which again, we're not going to go into in detail. There's been a spotlight on the expert session, which I've got a copy of if anyone wants that with Simon, my tax accountant. So if you want a copy of that to go into a lot more detail, just message me, email me, and I'll send you a copy, a link. Paul, your views?
Thanks, Bronwin. I've got a limited company, which I've got probably only about half a dozen properties in, but I set that up so I could invest with other investors who were not that closely acquainted to me. So it was the decision that we all made, let's go through a limited company. And over the years, I've bought them out, and I've now got that sitting, albeit and operational, but I've got it sitting within an LLP. And I'm sure if you want to know more about limited liability partnerships, which have a limited company within them as one of the partners, then the best person to speak to isn't necessarily myself, it's more Mr. Simon Mizovic. So, as the only problem I've found that investing as an individual is, as Simon says, you do run out of the mainstream lenders, but you still find plenty of people to lend to you, albeit not at the best rate or better rates, but it doesn't stop you investing. So I've grown my portfolio mainly in my personal name, and going forwards, that'll now be my LLP. So, but yeah, if you want detailed advice, then the best person is Mr. Mizovic. So please contact him tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you for that. One question I've got is for you, Simon H. Is the fact of getting mortgages in a limited company versus personal loans. And it's worth listening to our international viewers on this show. We are not just UK based, don't you know? We are internationally focused. For people that are expats as well, using limited companies versus personal names, I've had a few tax calls and the interest rates that they're getting is the same. So what's your views of people that are based, first of all, in the UK, rates in their own name versus limited company, and then talk about expats as well?
Oh, that's a whole subject. We could carry on all the way up till 8:30 on that one, Simon.
Try and minimise it. Trying to minimise it.
Yeah. You're always trying to cut me off in my prime, aren't you, Simon? I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so broadly speaking then, if it's a single let property, it's in your own name, for 75% loan to value, 2-year product, you can expect to pay somewhere in the region of 1.7% currently. Put that same property into a limited company, pre-coronavirus, that interest rate would have been 2.79. Post-lockdown, going into our second lockdown, that interest rate now sits between 3.14 and 3.25%. So there's a fair old difference between the personal name and the limited company. Don't forget that's for single lets. Okay, so that's standard yielding properties that you can hand to a regular estate agent who doesn't need to be absolutely all singing, all dancing in terms of management, and they should be able to do a half decent job, potentially. If you then move on to a higher yielding strategy, which is HMOs, and by HMOs, I'm defining those as having 5 or more bedrooms where each tenant has their own tenancy agreement, not like a student accommodation that could be 4 or 5 rooms and all students are on one tenancy agreement. For that kind of tenancy agreement, the student ones, you can still potentially get rates under 2% in your own name. But if you've gone for the more cash flow positive HMO strategy where you've got individual tenancy agreements, those interest rates will now start, whether it's in a limited company or in your own name, at 3.14 to 3.25%. There's now no differentiation about how that property is owned or what tax structure it works within. So if you were looking to build a portfolio, you could potentially speak to tax advisor Simon. Yeah, you could potentially, if you are not a high rate taxpayer, buy properties in your own name that are single let, buy properties in a limited company that are HMOs. Yeah, okay, and mix and match the both potentially to make it work for you. And if we then add in the complexities of expats, now expat mortgages for single lets, there are a few, actually this does depend on where you are in the country, right? And I say that as in where you're buying in the country. If you're borrowing, if your loan size is of 200,000 or more, okay, potentially there are some personal name lenders that will lend to you in the 2%, low 2s for a 2-year deal. But if you're only borrowing, let's say 100 or 150,000, that interest rate will creep back up into the threes. At which point there is now no real difference between limited company or personal names for the interest rate. The interest rates are now broadly similar, 3.14 to 3.25. You then need to decide again with your tax advisor how long you're going to be expat, what the tax conditions are of your domiciled country, when you might come back to the UK, and then how you might work, what income you're going to have, and then work out how you then buy those properties. So it's a massive, massive picture. So which, yeah, that's the short answer.
I think, Bronwin, just on that point, maybe we could do a spotlight on your search session talking about tax versus mortgages, because I think, like Simon says, if I don't cut him off now, he'll be on it forever, and we really have got to move on. But that'll be a good session, Bronwin. If we can do that, that'd be good. Moving tax slightly, if I may, I'm going to talk about COVID-19 and coronavirus. If you don't know what it is, just need to open your window and see all the issues that people are going through right now and look at the newspapers, because that's what it contains. For kids listening in, if you're expecting any presents, forget it. The shops are not open. How can Santa get them on his sleigh anyway? So if you're expecting to see any presents on the bottom of the tree, which you may not even get a tree this year, forget it, kids. And by the way, you should be in bed by now. So talking about COVID and coronavirus, let's talk about contracts and tenants in particular. I'm going to go to Teresa first and then to Tim, whereby we want to talk about someone who is in financial difficulty because they are not getting as much of a grant from the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. They've been furloughed and they find financial difficulty, can't pay the rents. Talk to me about Section 8, Section 21. How do you even approach someone that is having financial difficulty? A bit of a challenging question, but let's start with you, Teresa, and then over to Tim.
Yeah, well, to start with, the NRLA have got some really good templates because, communicating with tenants on, such matters, you really do have to approach it in an appropriate way, because you don't want the shutters to come down and they stop speaking to you. So we've got some really good templates that are really worded really well, more in a support. It starts off in a very supportive manner, just wanting to know what the situation is and how you as a landlord can support the tenant, insofar as directing them to additional resources that they can tap into. Because they may not have considered that they can, approach lenders, for example, like credit card companies, utility companies, to ask for a reduction in like bill payments, for example. If they're not getting any self-employment help, then applying for universal credit is probably going to be the next stage of advice for them. If the landlord can negotiate rent reduction or a deferral of rent or some sort of rental holiday, if that's possible, then to build that in, and making sure that the landlord does document everything, so puts everything in writing to the tenant, just clearly outlining what has been agreed between them, and just basically keeping in contact with the tenant on a regular basis to ensure that their agreement, they keep on track with the agreement. The very, very last thing you want to do at this moment in time is to seek possession. So it's doing everything possible to avoid that route. And if the relationship has broken down between you both, then the NRLA can suggest some mediation services as well, because that may help, because when emotions run high, sometimes it can, communication can break down. So it might be worth employing a mediation company. But if you were to go for possession, you can issue notices. So you could issue a no fault Section 21 possession notice, but you're having to give 6 months notice. And if they've gone into rent arrears, then you have to make sure you've got the evidence, and then you could go in on a section 8. But either way, it's very lengthy process. There are thousands and thousands upon cases in backlog, and with the different tier 2 and tier 3 stages across the country, the bailiffs haven't been given they're just unable to execute the warrants for possession. So it could even be, if there's a lockdown, then the bailiffs even won't go in to seek possession. So yeah, hopefully that has helped.
No, it's good advice. Tim, over to you, good stuff.
My advice is very simple. Follow Teresa's advice. What she said is exactly right. It's a practical problem. It's all very well resorting to the courts, but it has to be a last resort because the delay is going to be horrendous. The number of cases in backlog already is colossal, and it's only going to get worse. So I think it's very much a practical thing. Keep talking, and if they've got some good templates for the NRA, then I would definitely start in that direction. It's a practical issue at the moment. Legal is a last resort on this particular area because the backlog is just going to be horrendous, and it's going to drag and drag and drag. And better get something now than have a risk of not getting something in 6 months' time.
I'm going to stick with you both, actually. There is a connected question about tenancy agreements and KSP5KP. You are going to have to tell me what that really means on YouTube. So that's a great header. But if you don't mind, Tim and Teresa, I'm going to stick with you because the question was, any advice on rent-to-rent leases or rental agreements? And a rent-to-rent, for anyone listening in, is where someone owns a property, you then rent out that property, and then you do a rent-to-rent. And I always find that the term itself, rent-to-rent, is a bit generous. It's really subletting. I know people are saying, well, it's very different. Not for me. It's still the same. You take a property, you do subletting, it's rent-to-rent. Now, my concern about that, and if something goes wrong with the property itself, and the person's trying to evict them. I did see a court case, and you'll have to connect if I'm right or wrong here, but a renter rented a property from the actual landlord, but they tried to evict the tenant. Now, the tenant had the AST agreement with the renter. Now, they had issues because they weren't the property owner, and the courts were pretty much saying, we're not going to evict them because it's not your property. Any advice on that one, Teresa or Tim, in terms of ASTs and rent-to-rent, and what thing you should look out for?
Oh, I mean, this is a massive problem which we highlight to councils across the country, that that landlords are susceptible to this. Where they'll just rent out a property apparently to a couple, and before they know it, it's been turned into a HMO, and different agreements are being set up. I'm probably going to pass this over to Tim because it is a really tricky situation for a landlord.
Okay, Tim.
I'm going to similarly make similar comments. To be honest, I've got a specialist property litigator, and that's probably a question for her. So I'm not entirely sure. I have heard suggestions that this is indeed a problem. My concern for rent-to-rent has always been on more fundamental, I suppose, that I think a lot of people go into it without having the right contracts in place. For example, if they have to make sure insurance is in place. So, for example, it may well be, and I'm sure Simon's nodding here, by actually renting out subletting, you may well breach your insurance policy. So I'm always worried by actually people being uninsured. Secondly, mortgage companies. I know often there are some very strict conditions on mortgage companies, so all sorts of issues. And I have a feeling that a lot of people go into rent-to-rent because it just looks so easy. It's easy money, you're the middleman, and sometimes they get stuffed. We had a client recently, not an experienced person, somebody who should know a fair bit about property, and he had real issues because, again, he did a rent-to-rent, and then he got someone else to actually run it as an HMO for him. This HMO person suddenly dropped down at the last minute. This guy was the middleman. He couldn't organise it, didn't have the capacity to organise it. So suddenly he's in this awful situation. He's paying full rent, market rent on a property to the landlord, and he's getting nothing for it. So rather than being a small profit, it suddenly becomes a huge loss. So I think a lot of people go into these things without having fully checked, and I think often the legals aren't correct. And I think, as you say, going back to your original position, I think there may be some serious issues with regard to who actually is the person who is able to evict, and that's only going to grow and grow.
Let's talk that over to Simon Hodgson, because surely there are some breaches in the terms and conditions of a mortgages, are there not? If you have a single let property and then someone else who's not you starts to rent it out as a HMO.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in the T's and C's of the original landlord's mortgage will be all sorts of things written in there. but generally it's the usage, what is allowed, what isn't allowed, and the type of insurance that needs to be in place. So depending on lenders, it can be more than 2 unrelated people. Some lenders it's 3 unrelated people, but as soon as you've reached that position, they then consider it to be an HMO, and the mortgage itself has breached its conditions, at which point, your insurance similarly has just literally fallen off a cliff edge. There is no cover there, and that's a potentially catastrophic thing. If in that circumstance, in any way, shape or form, there are some fire regulation breaches, and God forbid there's a fire, just doesn't even worth thinking about. That's a human life that's just not covered. However, there are ways of making rent to rent work, but you've got to be really careful about, so you would need to make sure that the landlord knows what you're doing. The landlord then changes to get the correct mortgage in place, then puts the correct insurances in place. Now, there are costs involved in doing that before you've even had one person step through the door. But it is a great strategy if you are looking to get involved in property and cash is not something that you are particularly got lots of. We could talk until 8:30 on this subject, but without a shadow of doubt, checking and making sure that what you do is correct, that you've got the correct agreements in place, that a solicitor's drawn those agreements up, that the landlord has changed the mortgage correctly, the insurance is done correctly, and if you turned it into an HMO, it then is completely compliant in terms of fire regulations, electrical safety regulations, gas safety regulations, then fill your boots at that point.
I'm going to go on a different type of subject, and what I'm going to do is bring Bronwin and Paul Hilliard into this question. Graham asks, when researching your first property investment, which is always a bit of an interesting one, in terms of nerves, emotions, and logical decisions seem to go out the window, don't they? It says here, how do you know what represents a good investment? The first one is possibly the most important, I would agree. Do it right sets you up and running and gives you the confidence for further investments. If it goes badly, it could derail your plans and confidence strange way. What are your thoughts? Bronwin, over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's always the dilemma for people where they're frightened. They're not sure. Should I do this? There's lots of different strategies. Well, what am I going to suggest? Get that education, get the basics in place. And if you don't want to do that, then stick to something really simple. Simple, buy to let. Do your research, talk to good estate agents, and talk to other people who invest in the area, and build your confidence in that way. You can't, a single buy to let is less risky, and you can work out the return on investment of a potential deal. So if you can work out what return on investment is, and email me if you want to know what that means, or read my book. The first one is the crucial one. It gives you the confidence, it gives you the platform to then progress. I started with a single buy-to-let. It was a flat in Winchester. It was pretty scary, but it's rented pretty much full time since I bought it. So yeah, it gave me confidence. I wouldn't buy it again if I was to start now because I've got more knowledge. But yeah, that's my view. Keep it simple. Paul, what would you say?
No, I would education piece even further, Bronwin. Without a doubt. Sorry, Paul. What happens with a lot of clients when they come to me, the first thing I will ask them is, where are you trying to get to with this property? And you would be stunned by the number of people go, I don't really know, I'm not too sure. And that for me is the number one goal. Work out where you want to go with property. What do you want property to do with you? And you can only do that by getting education and learning what all the different avenues are. Then working out, right, well, that one won't work for me. That won't work for me. That won't work for me. Right, that strategy will work for me. And then if doing that strategy, if you're doing that strategy in one to its maximum is too much the first time out, work out what a baby step is to get to that next one. And again, you can only do that with education. And I know I keep saying this, Bronwin.
Yeah.
come back, get education. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you can take that first step with confidence, even if it's not the full step, just the baby step.
That's right.
Yeah, because that is for me as a broker. Okay, do you want to recycle your cash? Oh, can I? Right. How do I do that? Well, there's this strategy, that strategy. That. Oh no, this one's not going to work. Perhaps we need to go and find another property.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've jumped in. I'm really sorry. Sorry, Simon.
Thank you, Paul. I'll admit, I can't remember 28 years ago, but I did start off small, looked at flats, albeit small, in 1 or 2 story, certainly not multi-story flats, and then growing the portfolio slowly but surely. But when I took the decision to jump out of the corporate life, it was very much once I looked at my thoughts, it was, crikey, how the hell am I going to replace my salary? And single family lets did not help to replace my salary. So it was a case of, crikey, I need HMOs. And if you want to do what Simon was suggesting, which is recycle your cash, then HMOs have got to be one structure you need to look at. But going back to what everyone, Bronwin, Simon, and even myself say, get the education, because you are going to make mistakes. The less costly those mistakes are, obviously the better. But if you've got education, then at least you know, A, where you want to be. What's the famous quote? Start with the end in mind. Is that Sir Stephen Covey? Or something like that. So start small, but think big. But get the education. It's crucial. So you've got to look at the buy, refurb, refinance scenario, and it's easier to do nowadays with HMOs. But when I started off, that's how I started. So I used to buy, refurbish, refinance, and I'd also say don't necessarily do it yourself, which is how I did it. Get the right tradespeople in to do it. Although I use specific trades, what I couldn't do. I did all the taking off the plaster, chucking the stuff in the skip, taking the roof. I did working as a labourer. You do all sorts of things to save money, but it's the wrong way, because if you get the education, we'll go, well, instead of saving minimum wage stuff, you could be earning £100, £200 an hour by finding your next deal. And that's what's crucial when you start looking at your journey. Right, do you want my first deal now, or do I go away, get some education, and then do the deal? So it's horses for courses, but, as everyone seems to say, get educated here.
Yeah, I would say, just to echo on those great points. From my own personal experience, I always think that if you're going to do anything in life, expect to fail at some level, because if you go in there and just try and protect yourself to a degree where you don't get hurt, or you don't have this vulnerability, then you don't do anything in life, never mind anything else. So do make sure that you go out there, expect to make some mistakes. No one's perfect, and everyone's going to get better every day, you would hope. So there is no such thing as perfection, and just get a power team behind you. I think if you're doing education, you've got to go with someone like Bronwin to help you through that education process. The psychology of it is so frail, especially when we're seeing mental health issues. Confidence is what breeds success most of the time, not ability. Just look at Aston Villa. So we'll talk about something else now in terms of probate. We'll move over to Tim about that. Obviously, we talk about delays of property being conveyanced at the minute. What about probates? How long are you expecting to get those kind of sorted out? Because obviously there's a lot of emotions around the situation itself, but how long do you think people should be waiting for probate sales to go through?
There are a number of issues here. Firstly, actually, probate itself is much slower because actually, to start off with the probate, you have to register it with the probate registry, and they can take months and months sometimes. We've had some real issues where they've been very, very slow. So I think I was saying earlier, any government organisation, whether it's Help to Buy or whatever. So number one, you've got a problem there. Secondly, it's the market. A probate sale is once you've sorted the probate out, it's no different from any other sale. In fact, in some ways easier, because usually you've got an empty property there. The only issue sometimes can be if you have another number of people, particularly if they're doing their own probate, they're the only executors, they may well not agree. That's probably the delay. But the real issue, I'd say, is actually getting probate in the first place, and then issues with amateurs. And it's perfectly okay to do your own probate, no problem at all. But sometimes if there are a number of people, family members, they may not all have the same view. At the moment, for example, I had to make a view, do I drop the price of these properties? It was a yes or no for me, so I said yes. I didn't want to, but I had to. If I'd had 2 or 3 other people, I can just see, oh no, we want to hold out for that price. They said they pay such and such, and it can be in the market for 6 months.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Another question on WhatsApp that we had before the session started. John Cena, WWE wrestler. Can't believe it. We've hit the big time, guys. So John C, just apologies for that. John C's just asked a question in terms of the same questions before, the sense of achievement doing your first deal. But the second one is, how do you protect your earnings from tax? Well, it really does depend on your tax situation. Make sure, like I said before, if you're speaking to Bronwin about your education and which investments you should go down, similarly, you need to speak to a mortgage broker to understand what mortgage rates you should be looking at, a solicitor to ensure that you get the right contracts in place and the SDLT stuff and whatever else there. Make sure you speak to NRLA as well, because if you're starting out, you need people to back you up. And don't forget, of course, that things like Education Bronwin, the LMPG to reduce your price of your goods. All of these guys that you're watching tonight are here to help you. So these sessions are brilliant, but make sure you do reach out to those individuals. And you could do that because below this video, there are a bunch of links that you can use to get in contact with each and every single person in there. Phil,
Simon, can I come in on that one just very quickly? I don't think it's anything that's been brought up before, and I'm aware that although people watching us some have had plenty of experience, there are quite a few who are relatively inexperienced or entirely newbies, and I think sometimes it might be quite confusing for people who don't know us well to perhaps think we've all done this very quickly, that it's been a sudden thing, that suddenly you give it your job within 6 weeks, suddenly you're flying off to Namibia or whatever. Actually, these things take a long time. Paul mentioned 28 years. I'm sure Bronwin's not even 28, so it must have been a much shorter length of time with her. But I've been doing it for ages. I bought property, I had to sell it to invest in the business and then taking stuff out. So yeah, I'm an overnight success after 35 years. And I suspect, subject to Bronwin and Teresa, who are clearly much younger than us, the rest of us perhaps are similar. So don't expect it overnight. It does take time and you'll make mistakes.
And to be honest, once you, as I say, it's when you're experienced, you do get a lot of hairs on your chest, and Tim has got 2. So let's move on to a different subject before I get myself into any further trouble. We're talking, actually, the question was on WhatsApp. I should go back to that now. The question was, which demographic group is best to aim for to have a sustainable income as your first HMO in the next 5 years? Really interesting question. I'm going to go to Paul Hilliard first and then go over to Bronwin. So from a HMO's perspective, I know you both invest in HMOs. Which demographic do you go for and why? I feel like I'm, should be on blind date with that kind of posing question.
That is a very good question, and what I would say, there's no obvious answer. As I said earlier in the introduction, I deal with social housing, so I've managed to find a provider who will tenant it for me, and I can let HMOs out at very silly, and I'm talking £200+ a week. But then there's on cost for that, so you have to provide support. And the other thing is that you are dealing with vulnerable tenants, because they're vulnerable, they don't really appreciate that. Oh yes, I'm homeless, but I've got a home and I'll wreck it. And so you do find that depending on the tenant type, you do tend to find that there are costs associated with that. I deal with student HMOs, which until COVID, I would say it was probably the safest way to go, because the advantage of a student HMO is that you're tied up at least 18 months in advance. The students I let to are actually tied up for 3 years 3.5 years in advance. So I know once they're in, they're there for 3 years. Happy days. I can put an escalator in and I can forget well, I wouldn't say forget about the property, but they tend to be reliable students who are more mature, shall we say, and therefore they've had the partying, hopefully, and they do tend to look after the property. And they, so I would say student HMOs, but that was before COVID. But then again, the students I've chosen are actually overseas students. So yes, one of them's gone home, but they've come back. I don't know if they isolated. That's not really for me to inquire because they're not living with me. So that's down to them. Professional, great, but again, professional in COVID times could be suffering from being out of a job. I know someone, a very good friend of mine, who started work in January. Obviously furloughed. I say obviously, the company just closed down in March, and although he was on a very good, very good salary and paying R8 tax, 80% or £2,500 is not a lot of money when you're getting less than half what you were picking up originally. So it's horses for courses, and blue collar again. Usually they pay money in money. Who can tell what their future is? But you've got to look at something that gives you stability. So consider all those strategies. But I'm sure Bronwin can add her experience to that.
Yes, I think it's a great question, and it's a hard question because it's a very personal thing. I know when I was looking, I was thinking of my son in mind. Now, he was leaving university and he couldn't afford to buy, so he wanted somewhere that was really, really smart, nothing like the student digs. So I sort of had him in my mind when I was creating my HMOs. Earning an okay salary, but actually wanting somewhere with a few luxuries, maybe sort of, really good plasma TV and that sort of thing. So, but I think hospital, I would say hospital workers. I have an HMO near a very big teaching hospital in Southampton. Always rents very, very well. And I also know that doctors really struggle to find good quality accommodation, especially when they're moving from one place to a different hospital. So I would say go differentiate yourself from other HMOs, go high end, go for your doctors, really high end. They're prepared to pay probably 1.5 times what I get per month per room. And I know if I was starting again, I would certainly aim at that type of person, because I know there's demand there. So that's what I would say. I've got a variety, just like Paul. It's the way that you tend to work. Different locations attract different people. So again, I wouldn't go for just one. If you were expanding and doing several, I would perhaps go for slightly different tenant types, and then you balance your risk a little bit. But it's a very personal thing, as I said.
There's a question that's come in on YouTube. This is the Mulholland's One. The Mulholland's One. So hello, good evening from my YouTube. Don't forget to press the thumbs up if you are enjoying this video. Please do that. It just kind of helps people to understand if this is a video channel that should be watching. And in this particular episode, don't type it in using your keyboard. There's actually a thumb button that you can press to give it a thumbs up. So don't type it in. I appreciate those that have done that. But if you could do it on the actual device, that'd be fantastic. And ask your question as well. We are live. This Property Experts panel is here to help you. And again, you can get their links to get in contact with them below this video. Now, the question I've got here is about service accommodation. So the Mulholland's One says, David asks, what's the current experience with service as SA? So I guess service accommodation. Back to you two, actually. We'll stick with the two of you. Your service accommodation, how is it faring? Obviously, with this lockdown situation now, will people be able to utilize your property, or what are your plans for those properties going forwards?
Who's that for? Sorry.
We'll go with you, Bronwin, first, and then over to Mr. Robin Hood down there.
So I have sort of serviced accommodation like holiday lets, which have been doing very well until recently. And now, of course, the cancellations are coming in because people can't travel. So you've got this latent demand, it seemed. We were pretty much fully booked since I've been out and come out to Namibia, because we rent our own home out, as well as a holiday let next door. So, that's not been too bad over the year. But I also have short-term accommodation for council, and also I do street homeless. So this sector is very buoyant, as you can imagine. There's huge need, but it's quite specialist. And as Paul said, there can be quite a lot of need in this area. So it's not something I would suggest people start with. But if you can pivot, as the word is, and look where the demand is in your area, it will be in council areas and where people need housing, perhaps on a short-term basis until they can find something a little bit longer. So I do anything right from street homeless up to council tenants who need somewhere quickly. Paul or anyone else want to comment on SA?
Yeah, same experience as Bronwin. It's been a very mixed year. I don't do holiday. Well, I've got one holiday let in Portugal, which has, dare I say, been a disaster, because every time, I think they've had one case or two cases in the Algarve, and I'm in the part of the Algarve that isn't popular, so to speak, because it's the quieter end. And it's very safe, and yet no one can get there to utilise it, which is a big shame, because I have definitely missed going there this year, hence the long hair. As regards target market, you need to get educated, because there are so many different types of markets. You can let properties from, dare I suggest, 1 hour, if you're ever interested, Simon, and certainly in certain areas of London, you can only go up to 90 days in a year. So, and I know in Portugal that if you let for more than a month, you then converts out of holiday lets into our equivalent of ASTs. So you must be educated, must understand what you want to achieve. But my usual target is contractors. My properties are in Warsaw, Birmingham, Solihull, and it's a good mix. And I've gone from a 2-bed up to a 10-bed, so I can accommodate various types of people. The short-term weekenders, from my experience and my knowledge, absolutely not doing at all well at the moment because of the current lockdown and restrictions on movement and entertainment and hospitality. So just be careful. Understand what you want to do. It's a very niche market. There should be lots of opportunities out there for holiday lets for next year, because this looks like it's going to continue, and therefore people are going to be tied to the UK. So look at the opportunities on the coast or in tourist areas.
Can I come in there? First of all, can I congratulate Paul, who, despite not going to the Algarve, seems to have the world's most amazing tan. Clearly, the Midlands is very hot this time of the year, Paul. I'm impressed. My essay, it's been interesting again, and I think what I think at the moment, because we're such a weird situation, we're in a recession, but it's not a recession, it's all sorts. There is no one size fits all. So everything is completely different. So for example, I know some areas service has been annihilated. So if you are relying on people flying on trips out just overnight, that's going to be annihilated. My essay was mainly contractors. We were nervous at the beginning of lockdown, the first lockdown, because we thought, well, actually that's going to vanish, etc. So we actually started talking to the local council, who were very keen, a bit like you, Bronwin, to use us for 6-month ASTs for some homeless. Just about to say yes, but we noticed that the contractor level had stayed up, so it still made money, so we kept on. The last couple of months, it's gone right through the roof. In addition to contractors, we've got loads of other people as well, who I think don't want to go to a hotel, they don't want to have joint areas that are whatever, and so therefore service has gone up. And now, we're still getting contractors. So I don't think there's a single answer. And I think also having a fallback position is important. We did two things. First of all, we could have got over to the ASTs. I own the flats, so I have no problem. The mortgage company knows what we do. But secondly, I think also we've got the back position there. We held money in the company rather than taking it out, so that even if the worst came to the worst, and actually we were not getting anybody through the door, we still wouldn't have issues with paying bills. out. So I suppose and that I think is an issue now, because you don't know what's going to happen. Tomorrow something may different happen again. At the moment, the government says, fine, carry on with building. So my contractors should be unaffected, I hope. But you never know. So I think have a plan B, keep some cash available. And it really does depend on your particular area of the market, because there is no simple one size fits all.
So good points, some very, very good points tonight. And we are getting towards the end. We've got 5 more minutes, so I'm just going through the questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to type those in. There are some questions that have been quite specific, and I've kind of not, I've tried to mold 2 or 3 questions together. So apologies for that if I've not been answering your specific question. But maybe just reach out to the guys that you were talking about on here. And again, the links to everyone is below this video. So someone's asking about how do I get in contact with Bronwin? Clearly, you can look at the link down below and get hold of Bronwin from there. Just some investment advice really for Bronwin and to Paul Hilliard. MPs. I mean, great target market, because they don't need to adhere to the law, do they? They can go wherever they like. So MPs is a great market for anyone listening in. Stephanie's asked the questions for Simon Hodgson now. So here we go. It will take up the 5 minutes. What is involved in getting a mortgage after extended in the case not being able to complete before the mortgage offer expires? So go for a property, go through the process, things are going slow, but the mortgage offer now expires. What can that person do, Simon?
Most lenders will allow it to be extended in increments of 1 month. So it'd just be a case of going back to the original arranging broker. Broker puts in a request to the lender will usually ask for a no change of circumstances form to be completed and sent back, and then extend the mortgage offer for another month. There you go, look, 30 seconds, boom.
I'm actually quite stunned. I was going to go for a kip, but there you go. So just on that, Teresa, there's someone asking about what is the terminologies we're talking about, ASTs and eviction. So Teresa, what is the difference between a Section 8 and a Section 21, apart from just numbers?
Right, yes. So Section 21 is a no-fault possession. So that means, you know, you've not got any particular reason why you're getting back possession of the property. You just want possession back of your property, and you give 6 months notice. And, you know, if they don't move out, then you do have to go for accelerated possession. But if you tick all the boxes in the manner in which you set up the tenancy, you know, all the documents were set up correctly, then the judge should award you possession back of your property. The Section 8, well, that used to be a quicker way of getting back your property on mandatory or discretionary grounds. And generally, landlords would have sought the mandatory ground for serious rent arrears. So a landlord would have used that, and that would have been a quicker route to gain in possession, but very risky all the same, because a tenant could, at the steps of the courthouse, just brought the arrears under, because it's supposed to be 2 months in arrears. So the tenant could have brought that just under, and then they wouldn't have been in two months arrears anymore. So it's quite risky taking somebody to court on that basis. That's why the Section 21 is the most popular route, you know, for taking possession, because you are subject to a judge, you know, making a decision in the court. So that, hopefully that has explained it a bit more. So Section 21 is no fault. Section 8 is you would go in on specific grounds. So rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, things like that.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for that. And this leads me to the last 2 minutes, which I always like to hand over to Bronwin to summarise tonight's session and to finish off the evening. So over to you, Bronwin.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you so much for hosting in the way that you do, because it's always fun, and I hope everybody listening has enjoyed it. And if we haven't answered your question, you know, do come back to us individually. You can see the skill that everyone's got here in our own little areas. And again, if you want more information, I've got a spotlight on pretty much everybody here now. So, you know, we've got some really good additional information. So yeah, I'm really happy that we set this up back in March, April, I think it was. We thought we'd do a couple because of COVID, didn't we? And now we're getting up to 200 people really enjoying this and coming and really getting value from it. So thank you everybody for registering. Keep in touch, and if you want some education, you know where to come. I've got a great website, Property Investing Foundation, should be a link below. Find my book, Building Your Dream Life. Lots of examples in that book, case studies from down in Hampshire. And that book just published this year, so it's hot off the press. So that's enough of the sales talk. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to the panel. And thank you to absent friends. Jenny couldn't make it tonight. In fact, she's looking to retire. So any questions for Jenny, we can put you in touch with her. But yeah, lovely to see you all, and thank you very much for attending. Cheers. Bye.